I'm delighted now to be joined by Christof Wittig of the LGBT Foundation and also the CEO and founder of Hornet, which is a wildly successful dating app. Christof, thank you so much for being with us today. I think you and we're going to talk a little bit of tech because that hasn't sort of come up as much yet today. And initially, I mean, I'd love to know your thoughts. We've been discussing kind of the line between politics and political activism, and I wondered where you think sort of social media fits in on all of this.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm Christof Wittig, the founder and CEO at Hornet, and also the president of the LGBT Foundation, both of which are actually Hong Kong based and Hong Kong incorporated. So I'm happy to be here. And with 25 million users, we are the world's largest gay social media app. We have always had a mission to bring technology to help improve people's lives. We also have a mission to help our advertising customers to understand the huge and immense purchasing power of this community. And that's something we're very explicit about, but also give guidance to be authentic. So, we covered a lot of topics. Obviously, I'm founder and CEO at a social media company. I believe social media play a big role in how people form opinions today. I also believe there's a lot of things that have recently gone astray. I mean, you have probably followed all the discussions around, especially the Facebook scandal with the Cambridge Analytica leak, but also some others. The recent grilling, if you will, in at the European Parliament yesterday of Mark Zuckerberg. So I believe social media do play a big role, but also we need to understand and carefully work that these technologies can do good and we limit the downside. And I have a couple of, obviously, initiatives that I would propose.
Definitely want to get onto those. But before we do, as someone who, as you pointed out, specifically has a foundation and a firm incorporated here in Hong Kong, how concerning was it to you earlier this year when even for a very short period of time, because the backlash was so extreme, Sina Weibo, the Chinese social media site, decided that LGBT topics would no longer be able to be discussed on its site, and there was horror and uproar for 3 days, and they had to reverse it. But do you think we'll see more of that kind of thing, and do you find it concerning?
Yes, so it's definitely concerning, and obviously this policy has been reversed through activating social media influencers. So what has been a topic that, where social media became a choke point or influence on the owners of that platform became a choke point, that's, I presumed, the reason why this has happened. Also influences and the activation of the community have reversed that decision. So it's kind of both sides of the aisle as well. So why do I present actually two organizations? So on one side, there's social media that allows opinion to be formed. In many ways, social media create perspective and nuance. You follow people and you make up your mind through those influencers. Influencers are nothing new. They used to be called journalists. Speaking for your professional, I assume. They're a good thing, and we need them, and we need the quality ones. So it's about having those quality influencers that help us form opinions. So that is where social media come in. In many ways, social media platforms are centralized platforms, but they don't take this stance, but they can be choke points. And if you've seen in this example, that choke point has been throttled by influence of the government. But the decentralized opinion leaders have changed that. On the other side, the LGBT Foundation is a non-for-profit organization that helps to utilize blockchain to bring all members of the LGBT community together to establish a common record of truth, which is not chokeable by any corporation or government. So we believe there's a decentralized way to actually disseminate or establish a record of truth that is not even influenceable by those who instigated that, and obviously Hornet has done that as a leading member there. So blockchain, I believe, is a way to establish a decentralized record of truth, while a centralized social media platform can be abused, but those two can work in concert, and I believe those two need to coexist. What maybe also is very interesting, that these technology solutions are fundamentally opposite to what has been around in the pre-technology times, in brick and mortar times. In brick and mortar times, we relied on centralized authority to establish truth. That was a government, an auditor, a corporation, a census office, and we don't trust these organizations anymore that much, so decentralization takes that place in blockchain. On the flip side, we used decentralized, let's say, town hall meetings or a pub to form opinions. And those become more centralized. So it's quite funny that these mechanisms have maybe entirely reversed. And what I'm presenting here is actually the thought of Sam Lessin, so I want to give full credit to this. But it's very fascinating to really understand how we disseminate information, but also form opinion based on that, and what role social media can play in that.
It's a very interesting dichotomy. It's sort of on the point of establishing a record of truth through distributed ledger technology, which is essentially what the blockchain is, and it obviously underlies cryptocurrency. What could that record of truth be used to guarantee or establish? Also, how do you envision that being used going forward?
Yeah, so let me bring this maybe a bit to the topic of LGBT. There's obviously many applications, and this is a wide field in every respect. But specifically for LGBT purposes and the goals to establish equal rights and acceptance for each member of the LGBT plus community worldwide, I think a mission we probably all share in this room. We will have put out a white paper, which is available at lgbt-token.org, which is the current state of discussion. And please do chime in. This is not my or Hornet or any specifics idea. This is a community project. The current thought of thinking is that there's three major areas where blockchain can create that record of truth. Number one is to establish and manage, yet safeguard the identity of the members of our community. How much are you open? How open are you in which context? How can you act on behalf of the community without being endangered? That's identity. Number two, we want to surface by tokenizing the pink dollar. By surfacing the economic power, we can actually strengthen and play our influence, our economic influence. And number three, we want to create a mechanism to provide funding sources for nonprofit or impact initiatives. So we believe we can actually utilize this huge economic power to actually generate funding for nonprofits so that they don't have to compete for donors, but can actually leverage our own economic strength. So identity management, tokenizing and surfacing the pink economy, purchasing power, and creating nonprofit funds for impact. And just to wrap up on this, the economic power is really what really fascinates me. According to some research, the purchasing power of the LGBT plus community worldwide is up to $4.6 trillion US. 4.6 trillion US dollars. If that was measuring a GDP, this would be the fourth largest economy in the world. It's right after the US, China, and Japan, and ahead of Germany and the UK. So we are no pushover. So if we were a country, we would have an aircraft carrier. Mm-hmm. So think about all these wonderful uniforms.
So, on that point about data security, how vital is it in particular, do you think, in this region to have a secure system by which to establish and manage identity, as you say, for, in particular, perhaps LGBT activists?
That's an absolute fundamental concern. I mean, remember, identity is what makes us members of the community, or your relationship to the community. You can be an LGBT ally, and you want to participate and help, yet you want to, safeguard, your identity as well. So, I believe, in many ways, let's start with the big topic: is, social media. Are we, how do we safeguard that data? I'm talking now with the hat of a social media CEO, and frankly, I have to talk against my own industry. if you use a product and don't pay for it, if you use Facebook and don't pay for it, you're not a customer. You are the product. Your data is being sold to a third party. That is a hard statement, but that is the truth. That is simply the truth. So first of all, we're going to internalize and recognize this. Secondly, if companies pledge not to do evil, they're under the pressure of shareholders. In the long run, they will, I'm not saying they will do evil, but they will always need to put profit above a user. And Google, in fact, dropped their pledge, do no evil, last week. They updated their mission statement and dropped that. So it's actually quite interesting how that evolves. In the long run, corporations are corporations. And I'm saying this being the CEO of a corporation. So what do I think needs to be done? I have 3 proposals to make. Number 1, I think every social media company should allow their users to pay so that they don't have to sell the data. Facebook's ARPU per month per user is $2.06 a month. Now that's a global average, blended average. But if you think about it, I would easily pay $2.06 a month to Facebook if my data wasn't shared and it was an ad-free experience. Maybe some other people in the room would do that too. I would probably even pay 10 times as much. So number 1, we should offer that, and we at Hornet do just that. So you can choose to pay to keep your data safe. But of course, within the limits, we will need to advertise if you're not paying. So I think that's a fair deal, and being transparent and literate about this, I think, is step number 1. Step number 2, users should be able, or every person and individual should be able to define how much of their data can be shared and how that can be, let's say, in the context of being an advocate, in which context is your role shared with whom. So here's, I think, where blockchain can come in. And there's great work being done around identity management and permissions by companies such as Civic or MadHive, for instance, that think about using your identity in a certain context, but safeguarding the data, because there's only one person that owns the data, and I think that's the individual. It's no corporation, it's no government. So blockchain, I think, is a big tool, and that's why at the LGBT Foundation we have that initiative layered in. And the third element is regulation. So I do actually believe regulation is a key piece here. And I want to give a shout out to the European Union. In fact, tomorrow is the launch date of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is, as you know, your inbox is full of those privacy changes. Have you seen that? Yes. So that's because everyone has to adjust and go over these privacy regulations to comply with the EU. And it's excellent that the EU has such a wide power that people in Hong Kong have their inbox full as well, because its fact is so influential that it can actually set a global standard. And this is the gold standard for privacy regulation as of today. Mm-hmm. So I want to laud this because it creates a level playing field. It then allows to enforce bad actors, call them out. And also it establishes a level of trust among all social media companies. So to wrap this all up, corporations will ultimately look for profits, even if the CEO is Christof. But with these tools, we can, I think, leverage or mitigate those downsides and look at the upsides while allowing advocacy to move forward.
Who has a question for Christof at this juncture? Towards the back. Oh, sorry, the light's quite bright. Perfect. There we go, in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Derek from Ace Concern. So actually, I'm working on online marketing campaign projects. So I work with a lot of data gathering apps. So I work with a lot of data collection as well. So I'm very thankful for Christof for answering my question beforehand about the ownership of the data. But also, I want to see if there is any other moderation for the data collection, because maybe for, is there any addition for like NGO, NPO to kind of like, I'm not sure if this is the right term to buy, do you know how to make use of your service? Because maybe we can get in touch with the community members more closely with your platforms, so that we can get the data and also we can disseminate our information such as HIV and AIDS intervention. So is there any other idea about the moderation of this whole idea of the platform? Thank you.
Yes, so thank you for that question. And the ownership of the data, obviously, first of all, you do as a user, you own your data and you are in full control. And thanks to the GDPR, you have the right to be forgotten or to download your data. And I think these are kind of the standards where things are moving. Obviously, if you run a company that is using data processing, you have the data on that server and you safeguard that data. So we obviously have very high standards. Probably no one is not hackable, but very high standards of keeping that data safe. We don't share it with third parties, like some of our competitors have recently done and got into very hot waters over this. We wouldn't do that. So we safeguard that data and respect the right of the individual. Obviously, there is data that needs to be shared with advertisers to target. I mean, that is just a matter how advertising works, and that's for instance in which country you are, what language you're using. This is anonymized data, and that allows advertisers to reach the right target audience. And I think that's a fair use of it, and it's also fully disclosed. And to your last point, how do we make that available to nonprofit and research initiative? Hornet has a long-standing tradition over the last years to work with research institutions around the world that range from the United Nations to Johns Hopkins to several of the HIV, for instance, educational organizations all around the regions, like in the Philippines and in Thailand, to just name a few examples, to basically allow for research. And we are on the United Nations website included in an anonymous way on the census of data on HIV in the LGBT community, for instance, because we have provided that data in a sanitized way. So we always are open, and if you have another project, please do come up and suggest that to us.
Thank you, Christof. I'm afraid that we can't have any more questions because we're about to do another kind of feat of technological wizardry and connect up with London, where the Pride and Prejudice conference there is about to get going. But thank you so much for coming to explain a bit of how blockchain can intersect with the issues we've been discussing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you for having me.
Fabulous. Thanks, Christof. Let's take care.